All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. You found our new location, 50 feet to the right. Amazing how confusing that can be. Someone just told me that the New York Times had an article on Confucianism today, so I've not seen that, but apparently it's a very topical, and as I'll mention, China is resurrecting its Confucian tradition quite actively for various reasons that we'll talk about as we go on. I was trying to think about how to try and just encapsulate Confucianism and the ethos of Confucianism. And so I thought, probably this hasn't occurred to you. You probably haven't thought this. But on the off chance, the idea that the ethical character of our political leaders matters. If this thought has perhaps crossed your mind at any point, you have a core piece of the Confucian philosophy, which says the quality of your world, the quality of your life, is determined by your character and the character of the people that you surround yourself with. It is by far the single most humanistic philosophy you can find. It really emphasizes the human at the center of everything. The character, the qualities, the morals, the education, music, the poetry, the beauty. But it always comes back to the individual and the person as I said, because it does matter. Sometimes just personally, and if you think nationally or imperially, as Confucius was thinking in ancient China, then it matters on a grand national stage. So this is really the core of it, and we'll return to this again and again. But I started last month with Zoroastrianism advisedly because I wanted to show, at least give you a hint of the influence that Zoroastrianism has had on Christianity and the development of our culture generally, because we basically miss that. We quite often overlook that huge influence because it's been lost in time and translation and for various reasons. What is even less well known is the Zoroastrian tradition coming from the Persians is shared roots with the Vedic tradition that developed separately into Hinduism. This is why it's the Indo-European language family, is because there's a common root there that many of the words that we use in all the European languages go back to. They're shared in the Sanskrit Vedic languages. They're there. They're a common root that, like I said, goes back thousands of years. What this means is Christianity, roughly 1.5 billion people in the world. Islam, another billion-ish people. And Hinduism, another billion-ish people. So 3 to 4 billion people in this world live in civilizations that were shaped, however distantly, by this common Vedic linguistic and sort of metaphysical outlook that you see both in Hinduism and Christianity. This is so strong, by the way, that you can find these strange books where they say, oh, well, Jesus must have traveled to India because the resonances, the concepts are so close to things that you see both in Hinduism and the story of Krishna, and you get in Siddhartha Gautama and the development of Buddhism, that there must be some connection. And so they figure, oh, he must have traveled there. This is extraordinarily unlikely, to say the least. However, the trade was going on. The cultural intermixing had been going on for 1,000 years by the time Jesus shows up. So of course there are resonances, very powerful resonances between concepts you get in Christianity and concepts you get in Islam and concepts that you get in Hinduism and all the related cultural movements. Not in Confucianism. This is a different thing entirely. Almost entirely without metaphysics. We'll talk about this, not entirely, but the emphasis is so slight compared with the Vedic traditions as if to be almost non-existent. They're not non-existent, but very close, relatively speaking. 1.5 billion-ish people in the world have as their primary cultural influence Confucianism. It's a totally different cultural, intellectual, artistic, political heritage of unbelievable vastness, by the way. The Chinese are the great literate society of all time. They've been writing everything down and filing it carefully for thousands and thousands of years. They invented the filing cabinet to file bones that they were writing on before paper was invented. I mean, it is amazing. It goes all the way back, way back. Amazing society. And so this incredible intellectual tradition is this river that comes to us in the name of Confucianism. But don't think of this as one philosopher who is passing down a set of ideas. This is a wave or a river like Christianity or like monotheism. It's just this vast, world-spanning, intellectual, like I said, artistic, ethical tradition that embraces every aspect of life at every level in the Confucian societies, which are, like I said, roughly 1.5, 1.7 billion people in the world. Another way to think of this is the Vedic tradition and the Confucian tradition pretty much take care of about 5/6 of the world's population. These are the great cultural rivers that flow. All kinds of variations within that, but if you look for the roots, this is what you're going to find. So Confucius himself lived, 5th, 4th, 552, 479 BC. Those seem to be pretty good dates for him. We don't have a lot of other good information on him. His family is theoretically known. We have some biographical details. But, as with all of these founders of ancient things, sketchy, lots of myths and stuff have been built up around him as time goes on. But what is clear is he was desperate to be a courtier or an advisor or a political worker in the families of the nobility. And he lived a period of great political instability that followed a period of relative stability. So one of the elements of his works that will come back over and over and over again is, it used to be good. Let's go back and do what worked then. He consistently presents himself, and we'll talk about the main works associated with him, as a conservator, as a student of the past, attempting to preserve the past and bring it into the present to make the present better. This is really core. This is his central plan. And he said what made the past so much better than the present and the foreseeable future was the nobility and the character of the rulers. It's a very clear concept. The idea was they were gentlemen. The symbol, the Chinese symbol for gentlemen, but really its closest translation in English is something like gentleman scholar. That the character of the people, particularly the leaders, was superior. Ipso facto, the society was superior. And so how do we get back to those kinds of superior individuals? Well, his answer is, make your bed. Really, it's the old cliche. Confucius said, you want to be a great imperial leader, make your bed. This is the beginning. The center of everything, and you'll see it's the second quote there. And he says, there is only one way to gain confidence for one's authority. If a man is not trusted by his friends, he will not have the confidence of those above him. There is only one way to be trusted by one's friends. If a man is not affectionate towards his parents, he will not be trusted by his friends. There is only one way to be affectionate towards one's parents. If a man, looking into his own heart, is not true to himself, he will not be affectionate towards his parents. There is only one way for a man to be true to himself. If he does not know what is good, he cannot be true to himself. The volume of work on Confucianism is astounding, and it's virtually infinite. And his own works are sort of large, which we'll look at. But this pyramid that he builds is just the core of it. First, note the humaneness. He does not invoke gods, metaphysical principles, eternal truths. all changing rules. And look at the goals. There's only one way to gain confidence for one's authority. A very human desire. How do I influence the world? Well, people have to trust you, believe in you, put confidence in you. Right? This isn't how do I achieve eternal salvation. This isn't how do I, become a perfect spirit and embodied in the eternal truths as a Socratic sublime eternity. Right? It's not how do I build a pyramid in Egypt and entomb myself so when I pass to the other world I'll be wealthy and have thousands of slaves to serve me there. It's no, how do I get on at work? I have things I want to do. How do I do them? Let's assume they're good things. Right? This core human impulse. He says, well, if a man is not trusted by his friends, he will not have confidence of those above him. Friends. Friends comes up over and over, and it's one of the most pleasing things about reading the works of Confucianism, is that he keeps talking about friends and brothers. Not so much sisters, unfortunately. Women, sorry. Once again, as great as Confucian is, we're still a few thousand years away from the big breakthrough with the women. But, if we make it sort of gender neutral, it really is much more fun. But I have to just say, the women in ancient China, sorry. But its core ideas still apply. We need not let that limit us because, he talks about the family, friends, parents, obviously children, sons, daughters. It's just this really conceivable. There's the famous passage in the New Testament where Jesus says, if you don't hate your family, you don't hate your parents, you cannot come to me. Go away. You must hate your family. It's like, well, that's, right? Not that we don't have those feelings anyway occasionally, right? But to promote that, Confucius is like just the opposite. No. If you can't learn to love your family, how are you going to learn to love a stranger? In some ways, it's a very simple concept. So friends, and then parents, right? If a man is not affectionate towards his parents, he will not be trusted by his friends. And there's only one way to be affectionate towards one's parents. If a man looks into his own heart, so here we come. It always is going to come back to this, by the way. Look into his own heart and is not true to himself, he will not be affectionate towards his parents. This is he believes, Confucianism believes and promotes the concept that if you're really honest with yourself, you'll be a decent human being. That there's various kinds of self-deception. That when the lesser angels of our nature triumph over our better angels of our nature, when we're less than we should be. But basically he thinks we should be great. You should be great. If you're not great, look in your heart. Talk to your friends. Look to your parents. Again, this incredibly humane. He doesn't say flagellate yourself or fast or leave everything and wander in the wilderness. Talk to your father. Always father again, sorry, but talk to your father and mother. Talk to your friends. Look into your own heart. Make your damn bed. If you want to change the world, you have to change your own heart to be the best version of yourself that you can be. So this extraordinary emphasis on the individual is pervasive. What's funny is we've received Confucian as this oppressive, right, very rigid social system that emphasizes hierarchical repression of everybody's individuality. It depends on what you mean by this. Confucius thought, and we'll look at this in the passage on music in a moment, that, if we learn to live with harmony with the people around us, we'll have a much better chance of flourishing and expressing our true selves. And one of the core principles here is human beings belong in groups, and we damn well better learn how to live together. Here's my best plan for doing that. And this plan, by the way, comes from the Zhou dynasty or from ancient times, from the preceding centuries. if you think, look, individualism, that to be me, I have to piss everybody off and run away and move across the country or, just do my own thing, all that. Those messages that we get, this is fundamentally opposed to Confucius. He says, really, you think you're going to be healthier, better off without friends, without community, without family? If you really think that. He's very suspicious of this concept. In fact, he's dismissive of it. He thinks it's incredibly inhuman. Look around how people live. First thing we do, of course, if we flee our families is we try to set up new families. Yeah. Right? It is we go, well, this family isn't working. I'll better go get another family. Now, that would have been tricky to pull off in ancient China, but even if you believe that, notice the same rules apply. Okay, you've now chosen your family as you choose your friends. By the way, this is one reason Confucianism emphasizes the choice of friends, is because he recognized that is where you have freedom. And so the choice of your friends really does reflect on, you don't choose your parents, don't choose your station. It really does reflect on who you are. So, okay, you've moved. Now you have a new family, you're setting up a community that you've chosen. Great, what rules are you going to apply? I think if you read Confucianism, it'd be hard to find better ones. Mutual respect, accountability, self-evaluation. Look into your own heart. There's only one way for a man to be true to himself. If he does not know what is good, he cannot be true to himself. So the concept of gentleman here is matched to the concept of scholar. His notion of gentleman is really gentleman scholar. Because how do you know what's good? You have to work at it. You have to study. You have to look at what the ancients did. You have to look at the rites and the poetry and the music. Because that's how you're going to discover what is good and right. It's not just going to happen. The common examples are, he compares people to jade. Rough jade has the promise of beauty, has the capacity for beauty, but it needs to be worked with knowledge and skill and care for its true beauty to shine through. And so right at the heart of this is study. I mean, he really, really, really believes that you improve your life through reflection and study. And that's just one passage from the Central Harmony, which is from the Book of Rites, and I'll talk about his different works briefly. But the concept here is that you can improve your life through understanding how people lived well before and modeling their behavior. We don't have to invent it new. If you've ever looked back in your life and thought, oh, if I only knew now, or if I only knew then what I know now, wow. Confucius is like, yes, other people lived before. They wrote things down. You can know now what you want to, if you want to try. If you're willing to really learn and study, you have this opportunity. You don't have to make every single mistake for yourself, although he was perfectly aware this is a good way to learn. He actually promoted this type of learning. We'll talk about that. But he's like, look, it's not new. People aren't new. We've been around for a long time. Even in Confucius's time, he's like, look, we've been around for a long time. We have all these records. We know what they did. We have their histories. We have their songs. We have their rites. Let's just do what worked. How crazy is that? And so this core focus on just being people, being human. You can't miss it. You can just randomly open Confucius to practically any page, and it'll be a love song or a beautiful poem or a discussion about somebody in a family or a question about how a ruler should treat his people, and it's all very concrete and understandable and not metaphysical practically in any way. There is a little bit of metaphysics, which I'll mention, but it is really just this core idea. Second example here, and this is from the Book of Songs or the Book of Poetry. All these titles get translated different ways, so it can be very confusing. That's why I want to go through them. And he says, music rises from the human heart. When emotions are touched, they are expressed in sound. And when the sounds take definite forms, we have music. Therefore, music of peaceful and prosperous country is quiet and joyous, and the government is orderly. So this is another aspect of this, is everything is tied together. That your music, your feeling towards music, how you experience music, is an expression of the orderliness of your character. But notice what the goal here is. One, music, peace, prosperity, joy, order. That's why I love this passage. It gets all the good words. What did the Confucians want? They wanted peace, prosperity, quiet, joy, order, music. This is the list of the good. Not sacrifice, suffering, self-denial. Right? Look, it's a phenomenal notion. Music is just one expression of this model of the good that is the goal. To live in a world that is orderly and prosperous and quiet and joyous and filled with music and peaceful. Not a terrible goal, I would say. And notice it's a goal here. There's nothing about there. We're not going someplace else. We're not going to be someplace else. It's not about an afterlife or another world or the Diamond Valley or anything. Right? In Confucianism, it's always the notion is you've arrived at your final destination, so fix it up. It's you're there. Here you are. Wherever you go, there you are. So there you are. So you may as well start fixing yourself up and fixing the place around you. Change the wallpaper, do some exercises, make your bed, and see how it goes. It's a profoundly un-Western concept, I would say, not to put too fine a mark on it. Hinduism, of course, is you're always on this endless cycle in Hinduism. You're always going someplace else in Hinduism. You're about to be something else, somewhere else, sometime else. Some transformation is coming, and that's what you should worry about. In Christianity, of course, it's theoretically all about the afterlife. This is just some temporary, transient place, and you're going. Islam, very similarly, follow these rules, submit. The name Islam means submit. And worry about what comes later. Even Zoroastrianism, battle of good and evil. Some great Manichaean struggle of absolute ideals with this inconceivable universe-spanning God. Confucius is like, music is nice. We like music. Let's talk about music. And for the longest time, the book that is called the songs or the poems, depending on the translation, people didn't take it seriously because it's a collection of songs and poems. And we know that can't be serious. Philosophy is not about songs. We know this. Right? In all the philosophy classes I've ever taken, we never got to sing anything, which I think is a real big failing. Right? We should have done some more singing. There's some great songs in here, by the way. But no, you're not supposed to sing in philosophy because philosophy is not about the emotions. But think what a weird world it is when philosophy, supposedly an exploration of the concept of being human in the world, does not include a lot about the emotions. Well, that's sort of ridiculous. Human beings have emotions. And yet, several thousand years of philosophy, with exceptions, our emphasis has been very heavily away from that. Confucius is like, no, emotions matter. Look, music rises from the human heart. That's where it comes from. That's why it moves us. And so when the music is in harmony and we're both moved together, all this is good. This is order. This is joy. This is what we want, harmonious relations. So they developed a whole philosophy, by the way. Chinese music is different from Western music because it's developed on this theory of the harmonious intermingling of music to produce peaceful, orderly, joyous states. That is the concept. If you know the tradition of Western music, one of the things that held it up for a bit was the notion you could only have one voice. It had to be monophonic because there's only one God. So you can't have all these chords and dissonance and all this because doesn't matter what people like. Doesn't matter what you want to hear. Of course, troubadours and stuff not following these rules at all because they're like, hey, no, we like this other stuff. But official music for the longest time was monophonic, or at least it was supposed to be, because there's only one voice of God. And then eventually they said, well, let's have some more, and then pretty soon you've got Debussy, and everything's beautiful. But that core impulse was not to say, hey, music, that's right there at the center of it. So at least half of Confucianism is simply this unbelievable emphasis on the individual and the character of the individual as shaping the quality of your life and the lives of those around you. This is not crazy. In fact, you could even argue this isn't even very great insight. The power that he had and the power of his followers, Mencius and many others, was to actually put this into action. It's not that people hadn't thought this before or since. But over the centuries following Confucius, not a lot of success in his life, by the way. Sort of failed-ish. He had very, very good followers who produced his work and kept it alive, which is how it became adopted. But in his own lifetime, he struggled. Apparently, he tended to be a very moral and ethically upright man, and this got in the way of his political advancement. I know that will be shocking to you. But it is true that he seemed to struggle with getting along. Going along to get along was apparently not his strong suit. But what happened, and what sort of his big breakthrough is, if you can think of this conceptually, is in a feudal system, the ruler has a whole bunch of independent nobles who they rely on to support them. And this is always the weak part about this, is that you, as a king or an emperor or whatever, when you're relying on these feudal people to do things, is they can team up and turn on you. And so it becomes, becomes this whole loyalty, bribing, all of Sturm und Drang and complexity and problems, and not a model for peace, by the way. What they came up with, and Confucianism worked perfect for this, and this developed slowly over a couple hundred years, but Confucianism became the center of this, is a notion of, look, no, you want an imperial ruler, one person in the middle, who is served by scholars, not by hereditary elites who invest in their families, but by scholars who take their position from cultural power, from cultural capital essentially, and from association with the emperor. If as an emperor you can do that, then you have a lot of people whose only loyalty is to you. They don't have dynastic loyalty to try to get their kids on the throne or to get their uncle promoted to a different position. And that concept just it's sort of the key idea of having a civil service, an independent civil service, that you choose people based on excellence and promote them positions of responsibility based on their capacities. Now, to us, this seems perfectly reasonable. In 100 AD, this was crazy talk, because everybody knew the best people are born the best. You're born to your position. The aristocracy rules because, hey, they've got the weapons and the money. And Confucius argued, and it turns out successfully against all odds, no, a lot of this responsibility and power and authority should be vested in people who really understand poetry. That's what you want. Because if they don't understand poetry, they're probably not very qualified to have anything to do with civil government. See, even now this sounds crazy. China has successfully implemented this policy for 2 millennia. It's just extraordinary. But why does this work? It's work. It is one of the world-spanning civilizations built on this concept, bizarre as it may seem to us even today. But it works because if you have an educated elite who has as their central tenet to be high character individuals before anything else, even before loyalty to the emperor, by the way. I mean, you always got to be loyal to the emperor or you get killed. But your first loyalty has to be to your individual integrity. Now, of course, this is with varying degrees, because these are human beings, right? But that throughput developed for the first time in the world an efficient, educated, organized elite that was not hereditary. And Confucius suggested, and something like this was adopted, but it's almost amazing. Confucius suggested an education system. So again, this is 450, 500 BC, in which he said every village of 25 families, I think it was 25 families, every village of 25 families should have essentially an elementary school. And then every town of 250 families should have sort of a junior high school and elementary school, of course. And then every town of 2,500 people should have essentially a high school. And then every regional capital should have an equivalent of a college. And the college is where the aristocracy was educated. He did not imagine you were going to get rid of the aristocracy. It was not a revolutionary in any way. But at that college, you would get the children of the princes and the aristocracy and those students who had risen through the education system through demonstrated excellence. And that would be your future. That is how, 400, 500 BC he suggested it. Thomas Jefferson suggested precisely the same thing for Virginia. And it was crazy. No one was going to adopt it. Like, that's crazy. That's radical libertarianism. We're not doing that. And this is 2,100 years after Confucius suggested it, and about 1,900 years after something very like the suggestion was actually adopted. When Voltaire and the Enlightenment thinkers found out about what was going on in China, because about that time the contact had increased and stuff, they were like, yes, that's it. This is what we want. You educate people and put them in charge of things. What a great idea. Again, it's hard for us to imagine, but for most of human history and for most of the world after Confucius, outside of the Confucian world, the generals were basically the sons of the nobility. Every position in government was held by somebody who was there because they were aristocrats. Often they farmed out the job itself to other people, but they got the job because they paid the aristocrat. So you would be the a minister in charge of irrigation. Right? Now, irrigation sounds boring, but in agrarian societies, irrigation, very big deal. Really, really important. Of course, you've never even been to your office because you're a duke and you're from God knows where, and you're not going to your office. So you sell it to somebody. You don't care who you sell it to the highest bidder. So now you're getting paid, and so the person who takes the office, in fact, but not in title, so they'll be the junior minister of irrigation, has to make that money back. And so irrigation is turned into some sort of tax farming system. And throughout the ancient world, civilization after civilization, empire after empire collapsed on this very problem. They would reach a certain scale, and then they just could not figure out how to crack that they had just become completely and totally filled with graft and corruption. The aristocracy would kill people off. You had the succession. By the way, every time you got a new king, he would immediately kill off all of his relatives because they were, of course, theoretically in line to be the king. And so if they killed him, so the first thing you do is kill all your brothers. This is ugly, nasty, unpleasant, disorderly. So in the 2,000-year Confucian history of China, it had some periods of disorder, but it had about 1,650 years of order. And a lot of that disorder was brought from outside invasion. It's an extraordinary record compared to any civilization. And today I didn't know about the New York Times article, as I mentioned, but The premier of China just gave one of his every 5 years they give a speech and have a congress for the big Communist Party Congress. But he's been giving a talk that any Confucian scholar could have given at any time in history. He announced that the number one threat to China, and I want you to imagine this, a president in the United States saying this, the number one threat that China faces is graft. It is that the officials in the government position are not gentlemen. They are not living up to the high standards expected of the people that they're supposed to be serving. Number one threat. Not terrorism, not the economy, not the United States, not, anything. Graft. Corruption. It is the purity and the quality of the ministers of state that will be determined the success of China as it goes into the future. He just lays this out. Now, some have suspected that he might be a bit of a repressive dictator in making, which may be true, we'll have to see. But the language he uses that resonates with the society is Confucian. We need order. We want people to be educated correctly. We do not want their minds filled with lies. This is all a threat to the state. Right? Also, by the way, talked at length about economic inequality. The future success of the Chinese experiment will depend on its ability to address economic inequality. That's why graft is such a threat. Again, straight from Confucius. You read the Confucian class and they talk about that. If the people are starving in the field, you're a bad leader and you're going to fail. And if they're starving because you are raking excess profits off of the land, then you are a terrible leader and you deserve to fail. Right? That is just, if you read the speech itself, I know there have been press reports on it because, it's a major event in world affairs, but one of the things they miss is that a lot of what he's saying is just really sensible. And I just try to imagine an American president standing up and saying that the number one threat to the American experiment is graft of public officials. We'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? It's either terrorism or something economic, or maybe the environment. We might say the environment is terrible and so that's going to destroy us. But the notion that it's the character of our political leaders and the officials who run things, that might influence us in any significant way, is... we can kind of understand that, but we're not going to, it just doesn't resonate. Right? It doesn't have, in China it resonates because they believe it. Because they've been believing it for a couple of millennia. And when you think about it, and we're running the experiment now, of course, it does seem sort of true-ish. The character of your leaders matters. But on a small scale, the character of the people you surround yourself with matters. And this is the Confucian thing. It gets big, and he talks about big things, but then he always brings it back to the small, to the immediate, to the human. Because he says that's all we can do. The best thing we can do is be judged on our merits, and our merits to be found good, so that people will rely on us to do important things. Then we can get things done. Otherwise, all we can do is either bully people, threaten them, or sneak around, do something behind their backs. He says this might work in the short term, but it's a long-term certain failure. Right? You're just setting yourself up for collapse. And if you look at the works of Confucius, so this is one of the key things. So the Confucian system as it was adopted, and of course I'm spanning a couple of millennia here, so very sketchy, is regional exams, local and regional exams. You would study the Confucian classics, and if you did well on them, then you would pass the classics and you would be certified to be a government official. Of course, you would start low and work your way up. It was basically a ticket to unbelievable success. To clear that bar was to elevate yourself and your family. And by the way, this is all about family. You aren't doing this for you. You're doing this for your family. You're elevating them to an entire new status, to a degree that's hard to imagine. I mentioned this on my lecture on Mencius, but my professor, when I was in college, undergrad, this was Chinese, Dr. Lok Chua, brilliant man. And he said when he was young, he would walk down the street with his grandfather, who was a noted scholar, and people would lay face down in the street in front of him as he passed, because he was a noted scholar. Right? Those are people who believe in scholarship, who believe in the dignity of that people. So when I talk about elevation, I mean in every way. And one thing when we talk about Taoism, it's important to note that almost all of the Taoists of note later on were actually ex-Confucian officials. And so this is a totally different relationship to the world when you're that way. So we'll talk about this. So you take this exam and now you move up. Now you're in the imperial bureaucracy. Again, low level, but the opportunity for essentially infinite advancement. If a wonderful novel to read about this is Dream of the Red Chamber, Dream of the Red Dust. It's 6 or 7 volumes, depending on the translation, and it follows families who are in the imperial service in various ways, but you get the sense of this incredible world that they inhabit. It's basically a soap opera. It's just a wonderful soap opera. But you do realize that the stakes that they were playing for, and that many of the characters in there would be in service, and then something would go wrong, political fallout, and they would lose their job. But you even if you didn't have a job temporarily, you still had status. So, because at any time you might be called back, and some of the characters do get called back, right? And so it just changed your whole world. So for many Chinese, it was something to strive for. The education that would move you and your family into a different plane of existence. Reciprocal of that was, well, now you have responsibility. And all of the evidence suggests that they got shit done for 2,000 years on an unbelievable scale. I'm a weird fan of irrigation just because it was so central to the success of agricultural civilizations, and the irrigation works in China right up all the way till the modern times, but say 1800, 1700, were world class, if not far and away better than anything anybody had ever had. They were just spectacular, and they're all being administered by a bunch of people who've been studying poetry and the Confucian classics. What we believe in is a technocratic education. That if you receive a specialized education in how to dig irrigation canals and make sure they run cleanly and they work and all this, then that is good and we will hire you to do the job. Theoretically, the fact that you might be lazy or corrupt or inefficient or careerist doesn't really matter, because you know how to do the job. The Confucian system is like, yes, we want people who know how to do the job, but we would also like people who have character to do the job well in a human way and not rob the government or just randomly kill people while they're doing it. That it does matter. In theory, Confucianism was trying to produce the kinds of leaders and administrators who wouldn't do some of the horrible things we read about in the news all the time. Right, where they go, somebody raises the price of a life-saving drug by 500% or 5,000% because they can. And they're correct, they can, and it turns out it's even legal, mind-bogglingly enough. But this is a third-rate human being, at best. Is it possible to select for first-rate human beings? And for all the flaws and the corruption and the problems and everything, that any system trying to deal with people is going to encounter. This is its big face of it. It's an attempt to sort people, to find people of character. And the concept is that a person of character trying to do something is better than a person who may know exactly what to do but has no character. That you should opt for the previous one. And it's an argument. I mean, you can make this argument. Is it more important to have good institutions or good people? Is it more important to have technical expertise, or is it more important to have people who have high moral values, ethically led, good principles? And of course you can combine these, and they did put specialty education into the Confucian system as time went by. They realized, we're going to need more specialists. This is, it's not that confusing or complicated to do this. They just appended it later. But like I said, for a couple thousand years, it worked. And so when you look at the Confucian classics, it seems like a weird collection to us, but hopefully it makes a little more sense. The key texts for Confucian canon, which I put on here, are the 4 books, and the 5 classics. And the 4 books are the ones that are really focused on Confucius himself and his writings. So the Great Learning is actually a section of the Book of Rites. And if you're going to start with one book, I would say that would probably be the best one. It really is. Sometimes that's discussed as the higher education is another title that will come under. Same book. And it is a discussion. This is basically a big philosophical discussion of all things we've been pondering. The Analects, which are very famous, and there are all these short, pithy conversations that Confucius had with people. Another good place to start, except many of the conversations have no context. And if you haven't read everything else, it's really easy to mistake the context, the idea, the theme, the emphasis, because they really are just short aphorisms. Some of them a little longer, some of them a little shorter, but they're quite short. Mencius, which is just a big book by Mencius, where you get much longer, much fuller discussions, particularly about government. So a lot of discussions with dukes and princes and whatnot about various problems. And then the Mean, which is another section of one of the 5 classics that harmony through sort of the golden mean. Part of this is the golden rule. Do not do unto others as you would not like them to do to you. This is cast in the negative in the Chinese world, which is, by the way, notice, doable. I can avoid doing things to you that I don't want you to do to me. That's quite possible. I cannot do everything for you that I would like you to do for me. This is impossible. Again, this pragmatic, humanistic core focused on what is theoretically humanly capable of being achieved. And then the 5 classics, the classic of poetry, or the book of poetry, or the book of songs, variously translated. And it's 300-ish, I think, poems, 105 songs, some other random things. It's really a wonderful grab bag, but this is, in theory, a collection that Confucius made from ancient poem songs that he wanted to preserve. That's what this is the idea of this one. The Book of Documents, which is a history of the Zhou dynasty, right? And this is important because, remember, I mentioned, look, how did they do it? And the evidence that we have suggests strongly that Confucius actually went and looked at the archives to compile this, if in fact he is the compiler. But the tradition is that he was, and that this is based on actual real research. This wasn't just him making stuff up. It's like, hey, they used to do it well. What did they do? Let's see what we can learn from that. The Book of Rites, which is again there's a big emphasis on ceremony and the performance of duty in particular ways. A lot of talk about what kind of robe should you wear and what kind of hat should you wear. They had great hats, by the way. We need to bring back those hats. And we tend to laugh at this, and we think this is crazy, and people tend to overlook the Book of Rites. Number one, it has all kinds of things. It's filled with lots. They're just these big potpourri collections. But 2, how do you make sure your leaders aren't just going off the rails? You surround them by forms of behavior and rights and duties that they have to fulfill in a certain way. And if they do this, then they are in fact successful and good leaders. It's a way of creating like a moral guide for leaders, all the way up to the emperor. The emperor has to perform the correct rites in the correct way, which is both educational to him, because he learns from doing the correct rites in the correct way to be a correct kind of person, and keeps him from going off and doing crazy shit that he shouldn't do, because he's busy doing all the rites and the forms. By the way, this if anybody's read The Tale of the Genji by Lady Murasaki from Japan, from Heian period in Japan, this is what that court is, where the court officials in Heian, Japan were so busy doing rites and performing the necessary duties that it kept them out of trouble. And they sort of just performed these unbelievably elaborate rituals until they got overrun by the warlords because they were too busy performing rites and duties. But this is you again, you can read this kind of taken to its most exaggerated extreme. It's a wonderful, beautiful, and clearly doomed concept. But in the smaller level, it is the notion that there are forms that should be followed. There are procedures, and it matters to the dignity of the office and the dignity of the government that they are followed correctly. Sounds crazy, right? Why not just do whatever you want, whenever you want? Every president should just come in and do anything they want, any way they want. No reason to follow the way things have been done. Right? Why would you need rights and forms and formal agreements and international diplomatic movement? No, why? That doesn't breed harmony or peace or continuity. Or does it? Let's reflect on this for a moment. Right? And so these works that often outside, if you're not familiar with their context, that seem crazy and off track. What does it have to do with philosophy? What does this have to do with good government? It just seems like all this burdened with the past. Like, no. I mean, yes, but not illogically, not irrationally. There's very good reasons why Confucius wanted us to have these forms. And then the I-Ching, people know the I-Ching? If you don't know the I-Ching, I'm not even going to try to describe it. Wow. There is, I mean, there's like a whole lecture series right there. That is the metaphysics right there. If you want to know the metaphysics of this system, it's the Book of Changes. It really is an ocean. Built around, in theory, it's a method of divination, but again, something we tend to get wrong. It's not the kind of divination that says, oh, should I buy stock in IBM? Please tell me. If you look at the Book of Changes, it's a book of reflection. It's a book of poetry and ideas and understanding of the world that reflects on you, that in theory opens your mind so that you can think more clearly about who you are, where you are, and what you're contemplating. It's really the sort of interactive self-interrogation, reflective meditation aid that is just, astounding. And again, in theory, ascribed to Confucius, gathering it and commenting on it, but in practice, not so much. And then the Spring-Autumn Annals, which again is another history or chronicles of its own region, to set an example. How do things go right? How do things go wrong? How do you make sure things stay working well in the world? And then finally, I would like to recommend, it's just the modern library has this little book called The Wisdom of Confucius. And I recommend this strongly if you're only going to read one short thing. This is very coherently organized, has lots of background information in it. And the scholar, Lin Yutang, just to spend time with the mind of this man is a treat. What a beautiful, beautiful work of scholarship this is, in the greatest tradition of Confucian scholarship. It just the passages, the notes, the background information, the way it's just, it really is truly, I would say, a joy. Always recommend going to the original text. If you have Chinese, that would be even better. But in translation even. But this is just the modern library, again, delivering a good book. But really, Lin Yutang's The Wisdom of Confucius in the Modern Library. Wow. Like I said, the Confucian work is great, but just to spend time with the mind of that man is extraordinary. And so Just weird, like we just don't recognize this almost as a philosophical system. He has overarching principles, but nothing that is like live or die. You know, it's hard to even grasp. But the metaphysical core here, and there is one metaphysical important element that is important, by the way, which runs wild in the I-Ching, is that the universe is harmonious. At its core, the universe itself is harmonious. It's just the law. He just says this over and over again. And I've always in my mind, I was trying to imagine how to conceptualize this. And if you go out, particularly in the mountains, on a cold night and it's starry and so just painfully clear, right? Like there's more stars than you've ever seen before. And you just feel this infinite, quiet vastness that just overwhelms you with order. I always think that's it. That's the harmony of the universe that Confucius thought just existed as a law. And he said, if you make order in your own heart, the order that you find will be the order of the universe. You are, in fact, because that's what the real order in the world is, the universal order. That's the law. When you find the good, you found the order. The order is that. It's just the universe in you. And so he appeals in the end always to this notion that in the end the universe is harmonious. And so things that are disharmonious because we've made some sort of mistake, probably personally. And that the best way to achieve harmony is, again, if we just go back to where I started, is only one way to gain confidence of one's authority. If a man is not trusted by his friends, how do you get your friends to trust you? How do you get your parents to love you? How do you get you to understand yourself? You reach into that core foundation of Confucianism, which is the reform of our individual selves through study to produce people of character. And then if you can fill the world with people of character, it will be, as I said from the previous quote, orderly, joyous, prosperous, filled with music, peaceful, and wonderful. That doesn't come from God. It doesn't come from the emperor. It doesn't come from any place. It comes from us. And it's the cumulative impact of this that Confucius really looked at and said, man, if we could do this, if we could pull this off with people here and now, we would have it. So, Confucian philosophy. Thank you very much.